You number our hairs and determine our days. You hang the stars and feed the sparrows. You open doors no one can shut, and shut doors no one can open. Surely we can trust you when the time comes for making big decisions, or for that matter, any decisions. We are in just such a season again, Father, and we know we are not alone. We will trust you for your generous wisdom, straight paths, and peaceful hearts, all for your glory. How we praise you for being the decision-making God, and it's not our decisions, but yours that make all the difference. We will plan, but we will trust you to order our steps. We will pray, but ask you to fix our prayers en route to heaven. We will seek counsel, but count on you to overrule faulty or incomplete input from our most trusted friends and mentors. We will search the scriptures, but not looking for proof text, but for you, Father. All we want and need is you.
Amen.
Free us from the paralysis of analysis, wanting to make the right decision more than we want to be righteous people. Wanting to be known as wise people more than we want to know you. Free us from the idolatry of assuming there's only one perfect choice in any given situation. Free us from making decisions primary for our comfort and others' approval, or fear their disapproval. Free us to know that good choices don't always lead to the easiest outcomes, especially at first. Free us from second and 20-second guessing our decisions. Amen.
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 I have the privilege of introducing our presenters tonight. Is that echoing? Bishop Scott Jones and Pastor Rick Just. I think probably most of you in this room are familiar with them, but I want to tell you a little bit about them, some things you may not know, or you may not have read their bios. Bishop Jones and his wife are graduates of KU, but for those of us that are Kansas State, we'll forgive you for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
After Bishop Jones graduated from KU, he went to the Perkins School of Theology, where he got a Master's of Theology. He then got his PhD from Southern Methodist University. He has pastored churches. He has served on the faculty of Perkins School of Theology. And then in 2004, he was elected the bishop of the Kansas area. And he was the bishop of the Kansas area from 2004 to 2012. And that was the time that the Great Plains Conference then was originated. And then he was the bishop of the Great Plains Conference until 2016. The last 6 years, Bishop Jones has been the bishop down in the Houston area. He retired in December and still felt God had something for him, and he is currently a bishop with the Global Methodist Church. He's here tonight with his wife, Mary Lou. Where are you, Mary Lou? She's back over here. Just a fast story on her. Mary Lou was the president of the Reese Construction Company. So we have been almost to Dodge this afternoon looking at some of the construction projects that her business is involved with on that road construction. So, and she had on her little hard hat, and she had to call out some of them that didn't quite have their safety stuff right. Then we have Pastor Rick Just, and Rick was graduated from the Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in 1994, and he has served several churches. He's known in Western Kansas because he was at Leota for a long time. And any of you that are involved with the Walk to Emmaus may know Rick from that, because he's been very involved in the Bread of Life Walk to Emmaus. He is currently serving since 2015 as the pastor of the Wichita, as the Wichita Church, Asbury United Methodist Church, and they have since went to become part of the Global Methodist Church. And his title is the Global Methodist Church Organizer for the Central Plains region of the Global Methodist Church. And his wife's here tonight. Where's Mary Lou? Over there. And so we have two Mary Lou's. And I'm going to turn it over to these guys. I don't know how they're going to do this. I'll let them tell you.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's a joy to be back in Garden City, and I'm grateful to you all for the interest you have in the future of the Methodist movement in this part of Kansas and your willingness to spend an evening. Tonight is primarily an information session. I'm going to give you the 30,000-foot overview. Rick is going to give you the more local information, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. You've been given, I hope, a 3x5 card and a pencil. Some of you have turned in some questions already. If you think of another question, please fill out your card, hold it up, and somebody will come around and collect it from you, and we'll spend some time doing that. We do have somebody videoing this event, and that video should be available to you if that would be useful in sharing this information more widely. Friends, I've been a bishop for 18 years, and what we're going through as a Methodist movement has broken my heart. It's not where I wanted to be. I'm a fourth-generation Methodist preacher. I did not go into the ministry. I did not become a bishop to preside over the splitting of the church. In fact, I wrote a book a number of years ago called Staying at the Table, that was an invitation to people to stay in dialogue and tension with each other. So I need to kind of explain how I ended up where I am and how the church ended up where it is. First of all, the United Methodist Church has been debating the issue of homosexuality since 1972. It's been a topic of every general conference. That's the worldwide decision-making authority for our church. It meets once every 4 years normally, and it's been debated hotly every 4 years. In 2015, the Supreme Court of the United States, in the Obergefell decision, legalized same-gender marriage in all 50 states. In 2016, the General Conference met and decided that they needed to address this issue more fully. And they set up a small group called the Commission on a Way Forward that began meeting. Later that year, the western jurisdiction of our church, that's the part from Colorado and Arizona to Hawaii, elected a lesbian woman who was married to another clergy person as bishop and assigned her to the Denver area. The assignment of Bishop Oliveto violated the church's discipline, which said that self-avowed practicing homosexual persons cannot be ordained, cannot be appointed, and certainly should not be bishops. But the Western jurisdiction went ahead and did that, and attempts to correct that failed for a variety of technical reasons, which I don't need to go into, but she's still the bishop in Denver. The Commission on a Way Forward began processing alternatives, thinking we need to find a way for the United Methodist Church to quit fighting over this issue. The decision was made by the Council of Bishops, on which I serve, that we needed to call a special session of the General Conference. One was called, and it met in the late winter, early spring of 2019. 3 plans were proposed to that conference. The bishops were pushing something called the One Church Plan, which would have allowed the ordination of homosexual persons and the allowing for any minister to do a same-gender marriage. Instead of passing that, the General Conference passed something called the Traditional Plan, which reaffirmed the teaching that we've always had as a church, which is that same-gender marriages are not to be performed, that self-avowed practicing gay and lesbian persons were not to be ordained or appointed, but that we as a church wanted to be in ministry with gay and lesbian persons, and we welcomed them into membership and all of our services. In other words, it's a position that I've called in elsewhere the extreme center, holding different things together, saying we welcome gay and lesbian people as part of our church, but we're not doing same-gender marriages, and we will not have those people living that lifestyle in our clergy. The General Conference met in 2019 and passed this traditional plan. Immediately, progressive parts of the church said, we refuse to obey the discipline. And the number of bishops and conferences and boards of ordained ministries deliberately violating the discipline began to increase. New delegates to the next General Conference were elected. And those of us who follow such things noted that the vast majority of delegates to the 2020 General Conference were on the progressive side. There was a sea change of reaction. It looked pretty clear that the next General Conference would move the church in a much more progressive direction. Well, realizing that, leaders of the church, I participated in these conversations, began to talk about, okay, what's a way in which we can finally resolve this issue? A group of 16 people, which did not include me this time, developed a document called the Protocol. The Protocol provided for an amicable separation of the church. It laid out some principles and was published in January of 2020. That was when we expected General Conference to meet in April of 2020. The protocol called for entire annual conferences to discern where they wanted to go, and for local churches to discern where they wanted to go. The special session that had met the year before had passed a new provision. It's a paragraph of our Book of Discipline, and I apologize for the details, but some of you may want to go and do more research. It's number 2553. And it said between February of 2019 and December 31st of 2023, local churches could vote to leave the United Methodist Church and take their property with them. Since the time of John Wesley, Methodist churches have had a trust clause that says your property is owned by your local church, but it's owned in trust for the whole denomination. In other words, the United Methodist Church can't sell its property or dispose of it in any way without the district superintendent's permission, so that churches and all their assets would stay in the denomination. Well, this paragraph 2553 said, we're providing a window of roughly 3 years where churches could leave if they had objections to the way the church was handling the human sexuality issue. It has to be a disagreement about human sexuality, and it has to be done within that 3.5-year time frame. Then COVID comes. Anybody remember COVID? I remember it. I flew home from a meeting in Atlanta on March 4th. That was my last airplane trip for a couple of years. One of my district superintendents came to me on March 12th and said, my parents have just been hospitalized with this COVID thing, and we all shut down. Mary Lou's company had a cabin in north central Kansas, and because I couldn't go to my office, Mary Lou and I just retreated to the cabin, and I worked from, it's Jewell County on the Nebraska border up there. Well, General Conference gets canceled. And all of a sudden, this protocol solution is not being voted on and passed. It required General Conference's approval. Well, conservative leaders of the church, looking at how things were going, said, we have got to make plans. That meeting in Atlanta that I attended drew up the blueprints for a separate denomination. It was called the Global Methodist Church, because it was going to still be Methodist, and it was going to include conservative Methodists from Africa, Europe, and the Philippines, who would form a new denomination that they wanted to be the traditional expression of Methodism. It was going to keep the same teaching about marriage. It was going to lower the amount of bureaucracy in the church and reduce apportionments by 1/2 to 2/3. It was going to refocus on evangelism and planting churches and making disciples of Jesus Christ. This blueprint was developed in March of 2020. But they didn't form the denomination right away because, well, COVID was only going to last 3 or 4 weeks, remember? Marilyn and I did worship services from our living room on Facebook for people because we knew we'd all be back in church by Easter. Well, that didn't happen. Our worship services gave way to other local churches doing their Facebook worship services and streaming them. Well, General Conference didn't meet in 2021. It was supposed to meet in 2022. That wasn't going to happen either because it's an international body and people couldn't travel to the United States. When the last cancellation of General Conference happened, the leaders of this conservative group in the life of the church said, we've got to form the Global Methodist Church now. And so last May 1st, they filed the legal documents creating a new denomination. They already had a leadership team, and these people left the United Methodist Church and became leaders of the Global Methodist Church. That group is called the Transitional Leadership Council. They then began recognizing congregations and pastors who wanted to be part of this new conservative expression of Methodism. They began allowing people to affiliate, and each United Methodist Annual Conference figured out how they were going to let churches leave the United Methodist Church, because paragraph 2553 has some requirements. Typically, the minimum requirements are you have to pay 2 years of apportionments, and you have to pay your share of unfunded pension liability. Let me explain that most annual conferences, not Great Plains, but most annual conferences have pension obligations to the pastors who have served, and unfortunately, most annual conference hadn't adequately funded those. And so, you know, when I leave a town, I want to make sure all my bills are paid. And so churches that were leaving needed to pay their share. Now, you all in Great Plains are blessed because you have an abundance of pension reserves, but that's not true in my conference in Texas. And so there was an amount that people would have to pay. There are other requirements, and some annual conferences added extra requirements, which they have the right to do. So starting last May 1st, going now up until December 31st of this year, United Methodist churches, if they hold a meeting in their local church where members of the church are all invited, and that group that shows up that night approves a motion by 2/3, they can leave with their property. However, that decision must be ratified by a session of the annual conference. So in reality, for many, many churches, the actual deadline for departure is sometime in April or May, because the annual conference will meet in June, and that's their last chance. There are some places where there's a special session of annual conference next fall, but for the Great Plains, my understanding is y'all have a deadline that your local church meeting has to be April 30th, annual conference will meet in June, and then you can disaffiliate. Churches that disaffiliate then have another decision to make. Are you going to affiliate with the Global Methodist Church or not? You could affiliate with the Free Methodist Church. You could affiliate with some other denomination. You could go independent, like Bible churches do in places. And so there are kind of two decisions that have to be made. One, we're leaving the UMC according to paragraph 2553, and we're going to be this going forward in the future. I'm one of two active bishops for the Global Methodist Church. I have been given responsibility for the Great Plains area, and so for those churches that are going to be Global Methodist, I'm their bishop. But I have 10 annual conferences right now. So rather than being deeply involved in as an administrator, my role is to be a spiritual teacher and to inspire and make sure that the local leaders, like Rick Just, are following the rules and doing things right. Friends, I want to tell you that I am excited about the future of the Global Methodist Church. I think God is doing an amazing thing in it. I have been a Methodist all my life. I'm still a Methodist. But I also want to tell you that remaining in the United Methodist Church is also a good option. The United Methodist Church has a bright future ahead of it. It's moving in a progressive direction. It will be more progressive 10 years from now than it is today. The only question is, how far will it go and how fast will it go? But there are people who are gay and lesbian and need a Methodist church that is fully inclusive of them, and families that want that kind of thing. So that in Houston, there were a number of large, strong churches that are staying United Methodist because they want to be a part of that kind of progressive Wesleyan church. God bless them. I think it has a bright future. On the other hand, I tell people who are interested in remaining traditional Methodist on issues of human sexuality, in order to stay the same, you have to leave. And that's not a clear understanding that people have. There's a lot of information out there and a lot of people making predictions. I have made a prediction that says the United Methodist Church will be moving more progressive. It's only a matter of how far and how fast. There are people who will dispute that and say, you don't know that, Bishop. Well, I'm here to tell you that when our jurisdictional conference met in November, they passed resolutions that proved me right. Now, I've said a few things that, where I was wrong eventually, but in this case, it was nice to be proven right so quickly and so decisively. And so I just think that sharing information, so if your church is in the discernment process, this is a holy time for you. I want to tell you that remaining in the United Methodist Church is a good option. It's got a certain future ahead of it. I just want you to be fully informed about what that is likely going to be like. At the same time, the churches who go Global Methodist, I think you have a bright future ahead of you. I am 100% opposed to churches going independent. I think it's a death wish. I think you need to belong to a denomination for your long-term well-being. Bishop Wilson preached a sermon here at First Garden City last Sunday where he talked about how Native American leaders were looking 7 generations into the future. I totally agree with that. I think we're talking about our grandchildren's grandchildren down the road. And the question is, what is God doing and how can people best serve Christ? As a bishop, I wanted to bless the people who are staying UMC, the people who are going to GMC, and say every one of us needs to figure out, how can I best serve Christ? How can my church best serve Christ? People say lots of things about me on social media. You can find friends as well as enemies of me. But my point that I want to say is, it was in December that I knew, well, first of all, I made the decision to retire in June, but on December 20th, it suddenly came clear to me. Mr. Wesley, and I've spent my lifetime as a Wesley scholar, Mr. Wesley said to his preachers, you have nothing to do but save souls. So spend and be spent in that work. Don't go where you're needed. Go where you're needed most. And as I looked at what was going on in the Global Methodist Church, I looked at Mary Lou, and said, I'm needed at the Global Methodist Church, and that's when I decided to go. I'm honored to be working again with Rick Just. He was a district superintendent serving under me for only 1 year. Can you believe that?
Praise Jesus.
But it wasn't for lack of competence, it was because I had a local church that needed him more than I did. Rick, tell us about local stuff.
Thank you. Give him a hand. Thank you, Bishop. I talked to him the other day, and we were talking about social media here, and I said, it's not like your name hasn't been in the news lately. If you read anything, you'll see some things about Bishop Jones, and there was a word that was under one of the articles that said, controversial bishop. And I've usually tried not to get caught up in the social media stuff and type things, but I just had to put controversial? Well, anyways, I don't know if it was controversial. I think it was just who he is. I don't know. It's just Bishop Jones. But anyways, thank you so much for the invitation, Karen. And it is good to be working with Bishop Jones again. It's been a little while, and there's several things that I want to pick up on what he said. First of all, there is heartbreak in this. There really is. In all that's going on, and this last year has been a tough year for a variety of reasons for us, and in the life of the church, where we ended up leaving the UMC, which I've been a part of for 30-ish years or so. That was not easy. Okay, that's not an easy thing to do, but for such a time as this, and for where I found myself and where our church found ourselves, that was the decision that we discerned and prayed about and led us to this point. For those of you who are still discerning, I encourage you to be in prayer. That's pretty key. That is extremely key, to be in prayer and not just let your emotions rise up and be all reactionary, because as soon as you do that, you're going to hate the ones that you've been in ministry with for the last 10, 15, 20 years. So be very, very careful about that, and be mindful that these are the ones you call your brothers and sisters. So whether you're here in Garden City, or whether you're in Quinter, or whether you're in Lakin, or wherever it is, there's a lot of people here. Just keep that in mind. I've been accused of lately, I heard last week that Rick Just, he says one thing one place and one thing another. I don't know that that's the case. I will say this: if there's a meeting about questions about disaffiliation, I'm going to say one thing there because I don't want to sway their vote. I'm going to talk to them and try to give the answers, or try to give information like Bishop Jones has done here. If they've already made a decision, then I'm going to take it into some other directions with regards to the GMC, because I am a GMC organizer, okay? That's where I am, and so just so you know that, I want to be transparent. My role is to be the point person in this region, not only Kansas really, but it's been Kansas, Nebraska, part of Colorado, part of Missouri, and Oklahoma as of late, and some of that's changing, but so that's an important part for me to try, at least best I can, to give the best information based upon where the church finds itself, whether it's asking questions about disaffiliation or whether it's asking questions about the GMC. And I really like to just deal more with the GMC tonight piece, because I think all of you are at that point where you've had some of these conversations about the disaffiliation. I am disappointed that we were not able to pass the protocol to get to that point. I think that would have been the greatest witness to a watching world of how a church could actually shake hands, bless one another, and move forward. But due to a variety of other reasons, which I won't go into, it did not happen, COVID being one of them, but there were some other things. I've been involved, as Bishop Jones knows, I've been involved in renewal and restoration and revival type ministry for a long time in the life of the church. And I've been involved with the WCA, which is the Wesleyan Covenant Association. That still exists. If you're asking about that, the Wesleyan Covenant Association exists to act like a midwife, if you will, to help churches who are in the disaffiliation discernment process, to help them think through and ask the questions and those types of things, as we move forward. I was the president of that. As I moved into the GMC, that now has gone to Joshua Johnson. He's in Burlington, and he handles the questions more specific about disaffiliation. And so I moved into the Global Methodist Church piece, officially October 1st as an elder in the GMC, and our church becoming a church in Asbury Church, a part of the GMC, October 1st. Keith Boyette, who happens to be the Chief Connectional Officer of the Global Methodist Church, got a hold of me and asked if I would be willing to be the Global Methodist Church organizer in our area. And so I said yes to that based on some of the things I'd already been doing. In fact, it seemed like I was already doing much of that anyway. So just trying to help churches as we move forward in the process of what it looks like to be a part of the Global Methodist Church. We have something, or we formed something just earlier on in what we would call the Great Plains region, Kansas and Nebraska. At least at first, we formed something called the Central Plains area. We couldn't call it a provisional conference because we're not there. We're not to that point. But we put something together so that we could have some common conversation and a place where people could ask questions. We have a Facebook page right now called the Central Plains Area Global Methodist Church. And you can get on there, and we post on there every day, every other day, whatever. This was one of the events that was posted on there. In our conversation and in what was going on then, as we were moving forward, is the realization that lines were shifting. The people, to move forward to create a provisional annual conference takes roughly 125 churches to make that happen, and we were seeing that things were going to have to shift. And so those folks up in Nebraska currently are going with the Dakotas and up that direction to form ultimately a provisional annual conference. We here in Kansas, parts of Missouri, parts of Colorado, and Oklahoma are in the process of creating a provisional annual conference. In the meantime, to get to that point, we have something called a transitional conference advisory team. I am on that, as is Jordan McFall, as well as 6 other folks in Kansas, 8 in Oklahoma, 2 in Colorado, and 2 in Missouri right now. And so this transitional conference advisory team meets to first of all, to do what it takes to get ourselves to the point of creating a provisional annual conference. We're not about forming a bunch of boards, forming a bunch of committees, and all those kind of things. That's the work of the provisional annual conference. Right now, we just got to get there. And we got to figure out who are these people, who are the churches, who are the clergy, and where are the lines going to be, and so forth. So as of, I think it was just this last week, Bishop, the Heartland, we have what's called now a Heartland Transitional Conference Advisory Team. We dissolved that Great Plains piece, that Kansas area, and dissolved the Oklahoma area so that we could work together to form what we hope we can announce in the future, a Heartland Provisional Annual Conference. All right? Just quickly, I want to just give you a few numbers, so let me get my mighty Wurlitzer up here. I had Jordan McFall has been extremely helpful. Some of you know him. He's the pastor at the Goddard Church. They have gone GMC as well. And he is very, very gifted in administration, Excel spreadsheets, all these kind of things. He also is the one, for you clergy type people, if you sent your applications in or are sending your applications in to be a GMC pastor, he's the one that goes over the application and gives the thumbs up or thumbs down based upon what you've turned in. And so at this point, just so you know some numbers, I don't want to bore you to death on this, but I think it's important that you have a little bit of an idea that the current approved churches in our area, there's 12 in Nebraska. And now, don't forget, Nebraska is going to go north, but I just want you to know this. 12 in Nebraska, 23 in Kansas, 3 in Colorado, and 11 in Oklahoma. Churches approved but that is pending disaffiliation are 15 more on top of that, 1 up in Nebraska, 8 more here in Kansas, 3 in Colorado, and 3 in Oklahoma. So that's 64 with the Nebraska folks. And then as far as we know, we have 50 more churches in Kansas that have approved disaffiliation for June, and as the bishop said, that has to be ratified, okay? Even though, see, churches get confused. If they vote to disaffiliate, they think, oh, we're already automatically in the GMC or wherever. No, that's not the case at all. It has to be ratified at annual conference, and if a church is going to go GMC, they have to apply to do so, and you can do that digitally. Digitally? Wow. How else do you say it though? Digitally, something, whatever. Automatically on your computer. You can do that now. It's really easy. You go on the website, globalmethodist.org, and you get on there, and it'll help you, and boom, boom, boom. All right? So we know that we have those 50 more, 32 in Nebraska. However, Scott Brewer, who is the current treasurer of the Great Plains Annual Conference, who, by the way, was beyond wonderful to work with. I mean, he and I did a ton of work together in this process over this last year. There are more churches, because he mentioned around 100 in one of the latest articles that he had referenced. And so there's more that we don't quite know about, some more that are going to be voting on, some are still in discernment, and so forth. And then I have numbers on Oklahoma, but I don't need to tell you that right now. But I just want you to know that these are the numbers that are coming together to make what's going to be the Heartland Provisional Annual Conference. But we have work to do on this end, first of all, to first have our first meeting all together, coming this weekend, I understand, right? Except I'm going to be gone for that one, so Walter told me he'd catch me up later, Walter Fenton. But to just, even though we are awesome clergy and awesome churches, there are times when we are territorial. And, I know you don't know what I'm talking about. But, First Liar doesn't have a chance here, right? But be that as it may, folks in Oklahoma, they're a little bit, this is Oklahoma, and folks in Kansas are a little bit, this is our border. And anyways, we just have to work through that a little bit to work together. And it's working. I mean, really, we've already been at work in this process for a little while, and so it is working. It can happen, folks. Even if you get upset with somebody in your church, you can work it out. Trust me, it works. God's got it going on. This is what God does. He majors in grace. All right? That's why they call it amazing. All right. Just so you know, we could sing that song. But so we have this possible Heartland Provisional Annual Conference coming up. But prior to that, we have just some things that we're working on. We have an ordination service that's coming up in Oklahoma City, or just outside of Oklahoma City in May. The bishop is going to be one who's going to be a part of that ordination service. It's going to be great worship and some things like that. It's going to be a great time. So we're busy working, trying to respond to folks like you. This isn't just Garden City here tonight, by the way. How many are not from Garden City here tonight? Wow. So now all of a sudden you Garden City folks are going, no wonder, I thought you were new members of our church. That's good for you. I mean, really good for you. It just shows that there's great interest in what's going on and that people care deeply about the church. But we just want you to know that we're working hard together, trying to work through some of these presentations, to do the best we can, to be as objective as we can, and yet be transparent like me. I'm a GMC person, so I will share that. Phone calls, emails, and so forth. And so I just want you to be aware of those things. The current temperature in the Great Plains Conference, because that's what you're a part of, if you're still UMC, it has risen just a little bit since we left in October. And part of that, this is just my belief, but part of that I believe is because we're knocking on the door of the last day a church can have a church conference. And so what's happened is, if churches have not had the leadership in their church and some time ago already say, hey, you know, we need to sit down and talk about these things. What we're running into is churches that have not had the conversations and now all of a sudden are starting to blow up because we've just had this much time to talk about it. And what's being talked about on both sides is most of the time wrong. And so we just need to just know that it's a reactionary time. It's rather emotive, highly emotional. And so I just pray against that if you're in that situation, wherever you may happen to be. But the conference has been good to work with. If you have questions, call your DS. I think Zach's your DS out here. He's been good to work with. Scott Burr has been wonderful. The trustees have been great. Bishop Sines is who I was working with at the time. It's now Bishop Wilson. But we were able to work together on a lot of these things. And so whatever you do, here's two things. My mantra this year, some of you have heard me say this, is don't be a jerk. Because if you're a jerk, you will burn a bridge. And if you burn a bridge, you'll never be able to cross it again. And so don't do that. And so it may be that you don't get along for whatever reason. There's some things that happen. But be careful. I mean, I know a ton of you folks. And I care deeply for all of you. Not all of you are on the same page on these things. So, you know, pray through that, work through that, and so forth. So, lastly, globalmethodist.org is the website. And I wanted to have a PowerPoint to have these up here, but our server, something happened today, and it just, the devil's in the technology sometimes. And so, globalmethodist.org, you can go to the top and click on the four little lines on the right. FAQ section answers a ton of your questions. FAQs. There's a transitional book of doctrine and discipline, very user-friendly if you want to see what the doctrine and discipline and so forth of the church is. Another one, if you want a plethora of information, peopleneedjesus.net. Peopleneedjesus.net. It has something called the Compendium. It's by Chris Ritter, and it has every article written since 2019, the mess that happened at St. Louis there. I shouldn't have said mess, but it really was. It was just heartbreaking of what happened at St. Louis. And so all the articles on all sides are written there. You can read all about it. Of course, you can look at the umnews.org and read from the UM perspective. Goodnewsmag.org is pretty good too. And again, that shows a little my traditional bias, but I'm just letting you know that. So that's where I'm at, and I guess we're at Q&A time. Is that right? Or whatever.
I think we are. Mary Lou, do you have some questions? And if you have written a question, now's the time to raise it. And
raise your questions. I'll come around and get them, and if they aren't already in that stack, I will give them to them.
First question. If a church wants to disaffiliate until after if a church waits to disaffiliate until after 2024, will another trust clause be offered? Nobody can predict for sure what the General Conference will do. I will tell you that Bishop Bickerton, as president of the Council of Bishops, he addressed an association of annual conference treasurers and said that it is his intention to use all of his influence to make sure that nothing like 2553 is ever offered again. So I take that to be an indication from the leadership that this window that's in existence this year is not going to be extended. Do you have any suggestions on how to reconnect with the folk that have believed the story? There will be no change in the UMC, and have now decided that we are ruining their church. First of all, my suggestion is love your neighbor. What he said about being a jerk, I would say, I have friends who are very progressive Methodists who are staying UMC and want the church to ordain gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, and queer persons, and see that as the church's future. And I love and respect those people. I think we have got to love each other through this process, whatever decision your church makes. The question, though, that says the United Methodist Church will not change, the decisions made since 2016 indicate the church is moving in a progressive direction. And the jurisdictional conference's third resolution said in point 6 that the South Central, and all 5 American jurisdictions passed the same language, says that the jurisdiction commits to a future of the United Methodist Church where LGBTQIA plus people will be protected, affirmed, and empowered in the life and ministry of the church in our jurisdiction, including as laity, ordained clergy in the episcopacy and on boards and agencies. People will tell you this was an aspirational resolution. That's accurate. But if that's the aspiration, you can presume leaders are going to move the church in that direction. It's been said young people will not want to be part of a small tent church. What is your experience? My experience is that young people want clarity and they want Jesus. And that when a church is able to recruit younger clergy, when a church is able to provide the kinds of ministries that those people want. I'm worshiping in my son's church in Plano, Texas, where there are tons of young families. But then Arthur's only 38 years old, and the church has made an intentional effort to be engaged with those kinds of ministries. Young people are all over the map. You find some who are very much captured by a progressive understanding of human sexuality, and that's some of the reality, and so that's why the United Methodist Church will be moving in a progressive direction to reach them. On the other hand, there will be other young people who are looking for a more traditional approach to family life and morality, and they want to be in a church that's much more traditional. That's why I think in God's providence, there's a future for both the UMC and the GMC. How will homosexuals be received in the Global Methodist Church? In the same way they've been received in the United Methodist Church. It's continuing on our welcome to gay and lesbian people, and as a line that says, but we're not going to do same-gender marriages or ordain self-avowed practicing people. It's the United Methodist Church that's changing here and moving in that direction, either by changing the discipline or by disobeying the discipline. Now, I need to say something to you all that I've said in 2 of these gatherings to 1,000 or more people. If you are thinking about joining the GMC because you hate gay and lesbian people, you are in the wrong church. Yeah. That's not the future of the Global Methodist Church. It's a church that will welcome everybody because we believe in the power of prevenient grace. That God's love is for everybody, and Christ died for the sins of the whole world. What is the likelihood of a UMC pastor being forced or required to perform gay marriages in the future? This is a highly speculative question that there will be disagreements over. Progressive leaders of the church have said very clearly, no United Methodist clergy will ever be forced to do that. You might take that and believe that and see that that's the way the church will continue to live. I don't expect it to change anytime soon. But I will also tell you that there are provisions in the United Methodist Constitution that prohibit discrimination. And if a pastor is discriminating on the basis of sexual orientation, that might be taken as a violation of paragraph 4 in the Book of Discipline. I just can't see that when you've got the statement that came out of our jurisdictional conference that I just read you paragraph 6 from, that people demanding justice for LGBTQIA plus people will be satisfied with any United Methodist who isn't fully inclusive. We'll see how that plays out, and I may be wrong. Wesleyan, this is yours. It's about the Wesleyan Covenant Association and stuff I didn't know about.
Oh, okay.
Come over to the podium.
All right.
I'm still his bishop.
I think the other day I said he's not my bishop, and then I found out he's my bishop again. So we'll have to talk. Anyways, this is a question with regards to the Wesleyan Covenant Association and how a church then becomes a part of the Global Methodist Church with regards to getting the money that's needed to cover of course, the 2 years of apportionments and the pension liability fund. There's something in the Wesleyan Covenant Association that came out several months back, actually in the last year, called something called Leave No Church Behind. Now, I don't have all the information in front of me to get that, but there is some money that's available, and I don't know that it's grants. It may be a low interest loan, but there is some money available, and I would encourage you to call Joshua Johnson, and I can get that number for you in just a second. Joshua Johnson, who's the head of the WCA here in our area, or Jay Farrell, who is the president of the WCA on the worldwide level. He has that information as well. But that's where you would get that information. There has been money, there have been questions about that, and they were trying to develop a pool of money, if you will, for those that were seeking to disaffiliate but did not have that money. So I'll get that number for you here in a little bit and tell it to you, okay?
Can you share how our money through apportionments are supporting progressive movements politically? I'm not sure which progressive movements are included, but by and large, the general boards and agencies must follow our book of discipline and the social principles, which are sort of on the progressive side in a lot of cases. And so for a while, groups were part of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, a pro-abortion group. That got shut down in 2016. So that your apportionment dollars aren't going there any longer. And no apportionment dollars can be used to promote homosexuality. So those two things are not covered. But if you think about some other progressive causes, there are some places where conservatives have objected that are being supported, and don't have the details of that in my head. Will UMC lay speakers be able to be certified in the GMC? There will be a role for certified lay ministers in the Global Methodist Church. Lay speaking hasn't gotten a lot of attention yet. People are asking questions of the GMC, and my answer is, we're building the bridge as we walk on it. Mary Lou tells me that's a real construction technique, where you build a section of the bridge, move your equipment out on it, and then build the next section. Now, that only works if you know where you're going, and we do know where we're going, but there's some of these details that we haven't quite figured out yet. Will current UMC clergy be retained by the GMC? Our assumption is if a local church comes into the GMC and their current pastor also comes into the GMC and everybody's happy with that arrangement, we just leave it alone. That's the best thing going forward. The policy of the GMC is we believe in long-term pastorates. And the appointment system in the GMC involves a lot more consultation between, we call them now presiding elders, that's an old term for district superintendents, and the local church staff parish committee, and we expect that that's going to continue as well.
Bishop, that question was DSAs.
DSAs, about district superintendent assignments. We have a credentialing process, and we're looking for helping people get their educational requirements met. There are educational requirements. We're setting up courses of study. So there will be a pathway to continue those people going forward. but I hesitate to go into too many details because each situation is different. Where do the apportionments go and what do they support? Well, in the United Methodist Church, some of the apportionments go to fund the annual conference's budget, its staff, and its ministries, and the annual conference sets that budget in that annual meeting. In the general church, there are 7 funds: the World Service Fund, the Episcopal Fund, the Interdenominational Cooperation Fund, the Black College Fund, the General Administration Fund, and I'm missing one. They support all of the things that the General Conference has approved. So there are a number of general agencies whose staff and operating budgets work there. The General Board of Global Ministries is funded there. So the apportionments, the Episcopal Fund pays the salary of the bishops. The General Administration Fund pays for the holding of General Conference. The Global Methodist Church is much more lean, with a cap, so that the general church apportionment will never be higher than 1.5% of your operating income. And each annual conference, when it's formed, sets an amount that's no more than 5%. Many annual conferences that have been formed are doing 3%. I will tell you, my salary as a bishop is paid for out of that funding. But we have a very lean staff, and we have no general agencies. And there was one for Ministerial Education Fund. That was one I left off. We're not sending money to any seminaries as a Global Methodist Church, and so that's why the apportionments are about 1/3 to 1/2 of what the United Methodist Church has.
Just quickly right now, if you would go into the GMC. Right now, they are requesting 1% for the local annual conference and 1% for the general church. And then once a provisional annual conference comes into being, is created, that could change a little bit on the annual conference piece, but never to go above 6.5% total. So,
will there be certified laity in the GMC? Yes, we will have certified lay ministers there. Does a pastor have to be ordained in the GMC to serve a GMC? From our point of view as a Global Methodist Church, the answer is no. However, the United Methodist leaders are saying that they refuse to recognize the Global Methodist Church as a real church, and they are prohibiting United Methodist pastors from serving our congregations. When will the Global Book of Discipline be available? It's available today. Has been for 6-9 months. Go to the website that Rick told you, globalmethodist.org. Click under resources. It's a PDF file that you can download. It's about 1/4 of the size of a book of discipline. And it has our doctrines in the front part, and then all of the rules that will guide the church that are included in there. Why leave now? You don't have to leave now. You can stay. What I'm saying is there's kind of this window where you can leave with your assets, your buildings, your bank accounts, your endowments, your furniture, everything. If you wait past December 31st, or in Great Plains really past June, or really past April 30 to make your decision, that window may never be open again. It might be open again, but that's not clear that there will be another option at that point. You asked to look at the membership roll, and the pastor and DS turned me down. What are your legal rights? I don't think you have any legal rights. The administrative board of your church, administrative council, or its equivalent, controls that, and if they choose to keep it private, they have the right to do that. I want to stand on scripture, but the battle is 50-50 in the church. How do I keep my focus on work for God? I think all of us ought to keep our focus on working for God. All of us ought to be standing on scripture. We have to recognize that we have progressive sisters and brothers who believe they are standing on Scripture to change the church's teaching about marriage and human sexuality. At the same time, they believe they're working for God in that matter. God bless them. On the other hand, if you're on the conservative side of things, you need to be praying, what's the future of your congregation? How can your congregation best serve God? And whether your church decides to stay or go, you have to decide, where can you best serve the Lord? That was my decision point that I had to come to, and my choice, which might not be your choice, but my choice was to go with the Global Methodist Church. Have the money obligations required by the UMC for disaffiliation ever been tested or questioned legally? Yes. Unfortunately, there are multiple lawsuits going on in many different states. And each state has a different understanding of how they interpret church law, and whether or not the trust clause is enforceable. In Texas, the trust clause has been turned down. And so the conferences are in a much weaker position. There are 11 states where that's the case. On the other hand, in North Carolina and Georgia, the annual conferences have won the lawsuits, and the churches that sought to break the trust clause have lost. My understanding of Kansas is that the trust clause would be enforced, and so breaking it in a legal sense is probably not very likely. Does this issue go deeper than human sexuality? Yes. It is a deep issue that involves the authority of Scripture, our understanding of who is Jesus, and many other the authority of the Bible and how it's interpreted, so that much of the discussion around human sexuality issues bleeds over into these other issues. How do you interpret the Bible? What's the nature of the church? And so there are traditionalists who are very conservative theologically who are in favor of staying in the United Methodist Church. There are others who are very liberal in their theology who are staying in the United Methodist Church, and they think the church ought to be a big tent that includes everybody. And many United Methodist leaders have said over and over, there will always be a place for traditionalists to stay and feel comfortable in the United Methodist Church. On the other hand, there are many conservatives who think, I can't be comfortable in a church where the teachings about the Bible and Jesus seem to be different than what I believe. If a current UMC pastor leaves the United Methodist Church, do they forfeit all of their retirement benefits if they have not reached retirement age? Whatever your retirement benefits are as a clergy person are yours and cannot be reduced or forfeited. Period. Take that to the bank, people. However, some annual conferences provide special help to retired members of that annual conference. A clergy person holds his or her membership in the annual conference. And so those conferences provide a monthly stipend to help with health insurance in many cases. If you leave the denomination, you no longer get that subsidy because you're no longer a member of that annual conference. So there are some places, the Texas Annual Conference, where I served as one of them, where a retired person leaving forfeits their right to that kind of benefit. How do you foresee the future UMC view of nuclear family in 7 generations as God's plan? As I have said, the United Methodist Church is moving in a progressive direction. That's indisputable. The only question is, how far will it go and how fast? It's hard to speculate on that, except to say that American culture is finding a lot more openness to a variety of different expressions of marriage and raising children and family life. We've already seen a ton of change in the last 15 years. And if that's the direction, it's interesting to speculate. More than that, I really shouldn't say. What is the size and location of the conference we will be affiliated with in the GMC? Friends, I'm teaching at a Wesley House of Studies at Baylor University Seminary. So I'm lecturing on 19th century Methodism right now. I did that Monday morning for 3 hours. It's amazing to be talking about what happened 150 years ago or 200 years ago with students when I'm living it today. Well, in the 1820s and 30s, conferences tended to divide when they grew. The church was growing rapidly in the 1800s, and you divided so that at one point, in the Methodist Episcopal Church, there was a Southwest Kansas conference. That's why there's Southwestern College in Winfield. There was an Eastern Kansas conference, a Central Kansas conference. Then as the church began to decline, we consolidated annual conferences. So what Rick has just shared with you is, we think to have a viable annual conference requires about 125 churches. I'm mentoring that group he's a part of. We think that's the right size to start off with, but as it grows, it's going to divide, and my guess is there will be a Kansas annual conference in a couple of years. There may even be a Kansas West annual conference in a couple of years.
Bring it back, baby.
We are deeply committed to planting new churches, evangelism, and that's what I expect. But right now, we think there will be about 150 churches in Kansas and Oklahoma, with a few in Colorado and Missouri.
Can I just say real quick? Just quickly, also in light of those churches, in Kansas, for the most part, they're smaller churches. In Oklahoma, not so much. There's some larger churches. In Missouri, there's a pretty large church in Joplin, but in Kansas, there's not a lot of larger churches. So there's a lot of the smaller ones that we're seeing. Now, we did have a large church in Nebraska just disaffiliate, but it appears they're going to go independent.
They haven't decided yet.
Well, I hope we have a conversation.
We're talking. Explain about the unfunded pension liability and how a small church with a part-time pastor has an amount of $11,452. I can't explain that. Do you know the formula for this?
Say that again? Sorry?
Explain about the unfunded pension liability and how a small church with a part-time pastor has an amount of $11,452.
And that's for the unfunded? That doesn't include the apportionments? No. That doesn't include the apportionments, that question?
I think it's an error myself.
Oh.
That was an example.
Oh, that was an example?
And then when you have your final copy.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Here, we'll look at it.
See, that's,
Sure.
If that's it.
Which one? Oh, okay. It is showing prorated share of unfunded of 11,000. I don't know what the size of your church is.
I would ask your district superintendent for an explanation. It doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
When I left Kansas, there was a huge balance in the pension reserve, and I thought the conference was applying that to this amount of money. Anyway, that's a question that needs more detail. Basically, the annual conferences have this unfunded pension liability, and then they have to decide how to divide it up among churches. We got to the place in the Texas annual conference because we used some reserves, and also the economy went crazy with interest rates, and it turned out we had no unfunded pension liability for anybody. But I don't understand your situation. When can a church apply to the GMC? As soon as you have disaffiliated from the UMC. The disaffiliation has to come first, but again, on the website, there's a form to fill out.
It also asks for a date of when you would want to begin on that application. So let's say in June, let's say June 5th is annual conference, but July 1 is more than likely the date. That's the date you'd put down for the beginning of the GMC.
How can pastors transition to the GMC? You need to be careful, because once you have applied to the GMC, and your district superintendent or bishop finds out you've done that, that may cause problems with your current appointment. Again, the process is to go under a form on our website and apply, and you can ask to remain anonymous, so pending my church's decision, or maybe the pastor is going to leave the church, and if the church stays UMC, they might want to go someplace else. What support can churches expect from the GMC, pastors, etc.? If you're asking for monetary support, we don't have any. If you're asking for spiritual support, we're having gatherings where the Holy Spirit is powerfully present, and you'll find like-minded people gathering together. Our presiding elders are grouping pastors into support groups. We're providing inspirational stuff, and in terms of the local church, when there's a pastoral change, there's going to be much more consultation with the staff parish committee and the opportunity to interview multiple candidates. When will the conference be held? We're holding a gathering in Oklahoma City, just north of Oklahoma City, May 12 and 13. I will be there. We will be ordaining clergy who have reached their educational requirements and want to be a part of the church. We'll be credentialing those who are transferring in. I expect to hold the official convening session of the Heartland Annual Conference next fall, September, October, but we've got to get more clarity about how many churches there are and set that date then. What are the requirements for ordination of elders in the GMC? Well, we have a background check because we don't want people with, histories of sexual abuse to be included. We have an educational set of requirements. You don't have to go to an approved seminary. We have a list of recommended ones. We will have a course of study as well. So there's a list of courses, just like in the United Methodist Church, we want to have an educated clergy. And you have to be interviewed by our board of ministry. Doesn't that about cover it, Rick?
Yeah. And that's all on the website too, pretty much.
What is the GMC position on the inerrancy of the Bible and Unitarian Universalism? I taught United Methodist doctrine for 20 years. I can tell you that the GMC's doctrine follows completely the doctrinal standards of the United Methodist Church. It strips out some of the more liberal recent statements of the United Methodist Church. So in terms of the Bible, we say that we believe it's the sole authority in all matters of faith and practice, and that it's trustworthy. With regard to Unitarianism, we believe in the triune God, and the United Methodist Church refused to include the Nicene Creed as a doctrinal standard. We have adopted the Apostles' Creed and Nicene Creed as doctrinal standards, and they're in our book of Doctrines and Disciplines. How does the split affect Emmaus? I've wondered that. I was spiritual director of the Dallas Emmaus community for 3 years. I've worked more walks than I can count, including 2 a year ago. Emmaus has always been multi-denominational, so that we had Disciples of Christ people there. And when you had doctrinal, and Baptists, and when you had doctrinal differences, you sort of bridged over them and said, these are matters on which Christians disagree. I don't know how this is going to be worked out, and that's really up to the Emmaus community. Do you have an answer, Rick?
Well,
I just like to tap into that because this is a huge thing, I believe, in this area because Emmaus has been so strong and so powerful. But there's a reason that there's the model to follow so that we don't end up in the ditch to the left or to the right. And if you follow the model, it is Christocentric. It's all about Jesus. Now, of course, day one's God, day two's Jesus, day three, the Holy Spirit. But I mean, it is very centered. And if we stay to the model, and if your leadership and your board pays attention to that, you won't run off the rails.
If a vote gets 64% to disaffiliate, what do we do as the 64% that is unhappy with the progressive direction of the United Methodist Church? Friends, this is a difficult question. The bottom line answer is that every church needs to decide how it can best serve Christ in its community. That's how you do the church conference, and you let the lay people vote. Then, after that vote, every member of the church has to decide what church family do they need to belong to so they can best serve Christ. So that when a vote is divided like this, I mean, my goal is to have a 98% vote margin, okay? Because I know that you care about each other and love each other. But if you're at that 60-40 vote, 60%, 40%, then you really have to decide, okay, where can we best serve Christ? I've seen some churches stay together. People just swallow hard and say, well, let's hope that the Stay UMC people are right and very little changes. Let's see what the 2024 General Conference does. You suck it up and keep on. The other possibility, which has been done in a number of cases, is that when there's that kind of core group available, the Global Methodist Church may well start a new congregation in your community, and people have to decide, do I stick with my UMC friends and the building where I was married, or, my parents' funeral was, or do I join this new GMC expression? That's a tough call, and that's the heartbreaking part of this whole thing. Any changes planned concerning biblical doctrine? Is Christ the only way of salvation? Our church has doctrinal standards, articles of religion, confession of faith, Wesley's sermons, Wesley's notes on the New Testament, the general rules. When I ordained clergy as a United Methodist bishop, I said, do you know our doctrine? Do you believe it's in harmony with the scriptures? Will you preach and maintain them? They always said yes. Here's the problem, though. In the United Methodist Church in the last 50 years, people who violate those doctrinal standards, nothing happens to them. And so, while there's not going to be any official changes in those doctrinal standards, the enforceability of those has been declining drastically in the last 50 years. I know that because as bishop, I was charged with enforcing it. And I can tell you what progress I made in a few cases, but also some places where it just wasn't possible. How will pastors be assigned in the GMC? Bishops still appoint pastors. However, our commitment is to a deeper consultative process where local churches interview several potential candidates. They have the right to say no, and pastors have the right to say no, and that clergy do not have guaranteed appointment. And so it's going to be...
Huge. That's huge.
My shy retiring wife. If you haven't discussed it, please tell us about Church and Society in DC and their purpose. Thank you. Our church adopted social principles in 1908. That was the Methodist attempt to influence the society. Back then, the social principles said we should abolish child labor. We should only have all workers should have one day off a week, and unions should be okay. Well, over the years, the General Conference has added to that with a book called The Social Principles and another book called the Book of Resolutions. And when the General Conference enunciates a principle, the General Board of Church and Society does whatever it can to educate Methodist people about it and to lobby the federal government to implement those rules. So, for example, our principle has been that universal health care is a right that everybody ought to have in order to improve the health and well-being of Americans. This is a way of implementing the biblical principles of care for the poor and heal the sick. And they said, given the current things in America, that's ought to be. Well, the General Board of Church and Society took that standing of the General Conference that was official and lobbied the Congress and was thanked by Speaker Pelosi as one of the people helping with the passage of the Affordable Care Act. In some parts of the country, that was seen as a great victory by Methodist lay people. I, having been bishop in Kansas, Nebraska, and Texas, understand that that's a controversial position. But the General Board of Church and Society was not violating the rules. The General Conference had already endorsed that position, and they simply executed that on behalf of the United Methodist Church. If a church moves to the GMC, do the people who belong to that church automatically become a member? If so, what if that person does not want to be a member? If not, what do they do? What if they do want to be a member? Your membership as a layperson is in that local church. That local church transitioned to be Global Methodist. Your membership automatically transitions. However, my district superintendents always said to the people who lost the vote that night, whichever way it was, if you want to change to a United Methodist Church, I will help you do that by transferring to a nearby United Methodist Church that's staying UMC. We don't want to force people to be part of a denomination they don't want to belong to. That's why I keep coming back to this thing that while each church has to make its decision, each layperson has to make a decision, and they're both good decisions. Have you heard me say that?
Yeah.
It's okay to stay UMC. It's okay to go GMC. But then I also say it's not okay to go independent. Okay. Have I been clear about that? What kind of organization will be provided? We are setting up these annual conferences. We call them provisional because we haven't held our convening general conference as a church yet. That's going to happen in late 2024. And so everything's provisional or transitional until then. But there will be an annual conference. There will be a leader of it. We're calling it President Pro Tem, meaning it's not the bishop, but it's the president of the conference, which was one of my titles. And there will be district superintendents called presiding elders. We will have an organization and help churches both in their mission work and in finding pastors. What happens when the evil comes again? Friends, when I get to heaven, I have a bone to pick with God. God, what were you thinking? Surely you could have found a better way of accomplishing your purpose of saving the world than using human beings. We are sinful, we are self-centered, we make mistakes, we get easily distracted. God, what were you thinking? And like God did to Job, he'll look at me and say, who are you to question my methods?
Yeah.
Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? What I know is that the church is the body of Christ, but it also is fully human, which means we make mistakes. In the Global Methodist Church, a congregation can leave with its property, there's no trust clause, can leave with its property after a 90-day discernment period. So if the Global Methodist Church goes off the rails and your congregation says, we're done with that bunch, we ask for a 90-day discernment period and a congregational majority vote, you can leave. The deeds titles of our property do not have any language stating in trust or anything noting the annual conference has any hold on our property. How does the in trust clause bind us? First of all, I'm surprised if your documents don't have that trust clause. It's supposed to have them, both the deeds and other incorporation, articles of incorporation. But I've heard of a few cases where they were left out. The argument of the church is, if you've been receiving Methodist preachers appointed by the bishop, you have, in fact, by virtue of that reception, functioned as a Methodist church, and the Book of Discipline is determinative of that. That's what I mean about state law. In Texas, they don't care what the Book of Discipline, the judges don't care what the Book of Discipline says. In Virginia, they care deeply what the Book of Discipline says, and Kansas courts will just have to figure it out. What kind of leadership and direction will be given to individual churches? Much more freedom in the local church. We want decisions pushed as much to the local level as possible. What happens to UMC memberships? I think I've explained that. Having failed to disaffiliate by a vote of 75 for disaffiliating to 51 for remaining UMC, we find our church deeply divided. We are holding another vote this Friday. My question is, if this vote fails, what are the guidelines for a new GMC startup? I am specifically interested in size requirements, memberships, budget to expect to receive a pastor. Friends, this is a delicate issue that I think you need to take up with Rick Just privately. He is the organizer for that. We are interested in starting new GMC churches. Again, part of the question is, how many people are there? What kind of pastoral support do you need? And how can you support a pastor? What are the resolutions that were voted on by the UMC? There were 3 voted on by each of the 5 jurisdictional conferences. If you contact me or Rick, we can send you the 3. The most significant one was the 3rd one that committed the United Methodist Church to amplifying and empowering queer people in the life of the church.
And what was the vote count on that in the South? What was the vote count on that in the South Central jurisdiction?
About 135 to 35. And
South
these are the
Central
people.
jurisdiction.
These are the people who will be voting at General Conference in 2024. Interestingly enough, the leadership of the church is not posting those resolutions anywhere. I can't find them online anymore. If the church
They don't want you to know.
disaffiliates, what happens with clergy? Do you have a group of pastors to interview from whom, or will they be chosen for that church? Our intention is to provide each staff parish committee a slate of candidates who have all agreed to be considered, and that church then decides which ones they want to interview, and it's a negotiation presided over by the presiding elder with my final approval. There is a shortage of clergy. So one of my questions to a local church asking for a pastor is, how many people have you all sent into the ministry in the last few years? Who in your church might be getting a call to ministry that would be willing to be considered for that purpose? So I think both the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church have a shortage, and we, as we're building this bridge as we walk on it, are working hard to identify
Can I
people.
say
Yeah.
something?
Yeah,
Rick,
Rick.
Just quickly, just in our area, Jordan McFall and I, as well as others, but we've been trying to have conversation with other states around us as well to see if anyone is interested in moving to the land of Oz. Because there are some opportunities. We have some churches open. We have a spreadsheet that highlights these churches and the needs and so forth. So there are some, and it all just, I mean, there's just a lot of things that are still working out, as he says, as that bridge is being built or as that plane is being flown. So there you go.
And pastors who have the opportunity to serve churches sometimes have a cultural affinity. Mary Lou's grandparents grew up in Sherman County, or lived in Sherman County. And when I bring her to this part of Kansas, she said, "This is beautiful. There are no mountains to swell the view." The years we lived in central Houston, surrounded by live oak trees, she couldn't see the stars at night. So what you need is somebody with Mary Lou's sentiments who wants the horizon to be viewed and the opportunity to be out in the Great Plains. But I'll also tell you, I've got some clergy who think that they've got to have a Starbucks within 5 minutes of their house, and I haven't seen one here in Garden yet.
Oh, there is.
There's got to be one. I mean, you've all been a lot of stores since I was last year. Does the Global Methodist Church preach dispensational premillennialism? That's a technical discussion that I'd be happy to engage in, but the basic answer is no, because that's not Wesleyan theology. It preaches Wesleyan theology. What will charge conferences entail in the Global Methodist Church? An annual meeting to set the local church budget. Friends, we've been at this an hour and a half. I'm going to stay around up here at the front if you have a private question. Mary Lou, what have I not said that I should have said?
Oh, gosh, there's so much that you didn't say. Man, you did say a lot. But anyway, and thank you all for having us. It's been really good to be here out in Southwest Kansas. It's this is home country for us. So We're happy to be here. This is a really, really difficult time. One of the things that I would say is that the bureaucracy of the United Methodist Church is broken. We got too much. I'm not there anymore, but they got too much. And that's all I'm gonna say.
That's all,
And for those of you who are staying UMC, God bless you. God has a plan for your church, and fixing the bureaucracy is one of the agenda items. I'm going to pray over this group, and then we'll be dismissed. I want to say to the Garden City folks who organized this, Karen and your team, Bev, everybody else, Cedric, thank you for providing information. I hope this has been helpful to you. In your church's discernment, you need to have somebody who's more passionate about staying UMC do some presentations as well, because there are people who disagree with me and with Rick, and a good discernment has a lot of information from all sides. Just make sure it's fair and accurate. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your church. We're lamenting the difficult times in which we find ourselves. And yet, Lord, as the people of Israel journeyed in the wilderness, they had you going before them as a tower of fire by night and a pillar of cloud by day. We pray for your guiding wisdom that indeed you would help us find the promised land. All this we ask in Jesus' name, and all God's people said.
Amen. Amen.
Good night.
Before you guys turn off the microphone.